The first thing I learned about Druin's Rest was that its snow does not melt. Not beneath flame, not beneath plasma discharge, not even beneath the heavy boots of men stamping their feet in the cold. It clings, it endures, it sings. Yes, sings. Our VoxNet first picked it up as background static, no more than a whisper. Yet even when we switched to sealed channels, even when the Vox units were powered down entirely, the voices remained. Thin, liturgical, impossible. They spoke in Binharic rhythm, then in High Gothic prayer, then in something older still. At first, we dismissed it as fatigue, imagination born from too much cold and too little food. But the cadence matched perfectly across dozens of soldiers. And there is no coincidence in cadence. We landed 6 days ago. We were ordered to re-establish control of this supply hub. Once a vital relay in the eastern fringe, now a frozen grave. Contact with the administratum had been lost 2 years prior. The snowstorms had grown so severe, orbital augers could not penetrate them. The assumption was simple. The planet was cut off, its defenders perished, its depots awaiting reclamation. That was the assumption. Reality was something else entirely. From the moment our boots touched the ice, I knew this was not a normal deployment. The storm did not howl with the random violence of weather. It pulsed. It rose and fell in rhythm. 3 seconds silence, 5 seconds roar. 3 seconds silence, 5 seconds roar. A breathing pattern, a heartbeat. The men do not notice it consciously, but their feet begin to march in time with the wind. On the second night, we lost the first patrol. 14 men sent north to secure a relay tower. They vanished. No signal, no return. Just gone. By dawn, the snow around our encampment bore their boot prints. Returning boot prints, leading directly into camp, but there were no men to fill them. The company commander ordered silence, fearing panic. I stood with him as he lectured the troops on discipline, faith, and the Emperor's protection. His voice cracked in the middle of the litanies. He would not admit it, but he too heard the chants in the storm. I saw his lips moving with the syllables, repeating them unconsciously, even as he cursed their blasphemy. On the third night, the patrol returned. They walked in single file out of the white mist, every man accounted for, helmets unscarred, uniforms immaculate. They carried their lasguns in regulation position, their packs still sealed. But their faces, Emperor preserve me, their faces were not frostbitten, not scarred by storm. Their flesh was smooth, pale, faintly luminous, as if carved from wax. Their eyes were glassy, unfocused, like statues animated by some cruel craftsman. The men cheered their return until I gave the order to halt them. I asked their sergeant for his report. He gave none. He only whispered one phrase, repeated over and over. We were received. We were preserved. The medici examined them. No heartbeat, no respiration. Yet their limbs responded. Their pupils dilated. Their bodies obeyed command. Troopers sat beside them, laughing nervously, pretending this was some miracle of survival. But I could see the fear. None of us could deny it. These were no longer men. These were echoes. I argued for their immediate execution. The commander refused. If they can still fight, they are still guardsmen, he said. I reminded him of the commissariat protocols. He reminded me that my rank was adjunct. The matter was closed. Still, I cannot ignore the truth. This snow does not melt. These men do not breathe. And I swear by the throne that the storm is trying to speak. I write this now as the wind rattles against our hab walls. The chanting grows clearer each hour. It has shifted from nameless syllables into recognizable words. At first, fragments of the Imperial creed. Then, something else. Verses in praise of a nameless figure. The sun who waits in snow. The sun who remembers some of the soldiers, repeat the words in their sleep. Others wake screaming. Their throats roar as if they had been shouting all night. I try to pray, but the prayers are hollow. Each time I reach for the Emperor's name, the storm steals it from my lips and replaces it with silence. Addendum. End of day 6. The returned patrol has not moved in 20 hours. They sit where they were placed, backs against the hab wall, hands folded upon their knees. The storm piles snow upon them, but the snow does not cover them. It slides away, forming small, clear circles around their bodies. I ordered one touched. The soldier recoiled in shock. "They're cold, Commissar," he said, his voice breaking. "Of course they're cold," I replied. "No," he whispered. "Not like that. Not frost, metal. Their skin is metal." I dismissed him. I wrote it down. I do not think he was lying. If this is corruption, it is subtle. If it is heresy, it is older than language. The regiment grows restless. Fear is spreading. Order phrase. And still the storm chants. Still it remembers. Still it calls. Tomorrow I will investigate further. If I am preserved, I will write again. Cliffhanger. End of chapter 1. Tonight, as I stood watch, one of the returned men rose without command. He turned his head toward me with a sound like ice cracking. His lips moved, not with his own voice but with mine. "Varys," he said, "come into the storm. Log entry 002. Commissar Adjunct Varys, Druin's Rest, Day 7. Regiment status, fragmenting. Command structure, compromised." The hab bunker should have been a sanctuary. Promethium burners roared, sealed bulkheads insulated us from the storm's fury, and yet the chill found us anyway. It slithered along corridors, pooling under boots, crawling through, insulated fabric. It smelled like iron and ash, like a cathedral buried beneath a glacier. Command had become chaos. Officers argued openly, their voices rising in desperation and fear. Lieutenant Garris insisted the Vox orders were legitimate directives from high command. Captain Maltrius claimed they were falsified, the work of some Xenos saboteur. Each set bore the seal of the Imperium, stamped in gold leaf, yet the handwriting differed. Every order issued contradicted the previous. Supply runs were scheduled simultaneously to the same coordinates. Mortar strikes were called on friendly positions. The more we tried to follow protocol, the more the system disintegrated. I watched the men. They shuffled nervously, gripping lasguns until knuckles shone white. Some muttered fragments of the storm's chants without realizing it. "The sun who waits. The sun who remembers," I corrected them sharply. They looked at me blankly, eyes wide, as if recognizing words foreign to their own memory. I spoke with Medici Officer Tarl about our frost casualties. The corpse count was minimal, but the symptoms were anomalous. Troopers' body temperatures had dropped far below survivable levels without systemic failure. Fingers stiffened like carved ivory. Skin hardened in places as though they were statues, yet the men still walked, still obeyed orders. He confessed he had never seen such a phenomenon in a lifetime of service. Then the storm delivered a new horror. A junior officer burst into the command hall, trembling. "Sir!" The storm maps. "Look," I followed him. On the tactical display, the blizzard's trajectory had changed. It spiraled outward in impossible precision, forming the unmistakable shape of an aquila, its wings stretching across the northern hemisphere. Not a weather anomaly, an intentional pattern, geometrically perfect. "What does it want?" Garris whispered. I had no answer. I only stared, as the men outside the sealed windows froze mid-step, shadows etched into the whiteness by the storm's unnatural light. I counted 15 figures, then one vanished. Another stepped forward, boots crunching silently over a snow that refused to yield. Vox channels erupted at the same moment. Orders screamed through comms, multiple, overlapping, contradictory. But even the sound was wrong. Every syllable echoed twice, thrice, layering over itself, creating a dissonance that pressed against the skull like ice. One could almost see the voice, a jagged ripple in the air. The junior officer pointed to the display again. "They're moving." All of them. The ones that vanished. They're marching toward us. I felt the first twinge of panic, not mine, but the panic of reality itself. The storm was not weather. The snow was not snow. The patterns were a map, a machine, and a ritual all at once. We attempted a muster, but half the squad was missing. They hadn't left the rooms. They were inside. Them. Yet the rooms themselves seemed to reject them, walls shifting subtly as if breathing. Medicaid Tarrell checked the logs. No record of their movement existed. The furniture was where it should not have been. The floor's tiles warped slightly, forming angles that mathematically should not exist. The commander argued discipline. "We hold our positions." "We enforce the Emperor's will," I agreed, but only with my teeth clenched. There is no command in a place where space itself bends against you. Then came the first casualty of order breaking. A communications officer, Corporal Hestia, attempted to seal a Vox relay. The unit screamed in feedback, a high-pitched resonance that clawed at my eardrums. The display flickered. Hestia's hands went rigid. Frost spread up her arms in seconds, crystallizing over veins. She gasped, but her lungs did not move. I pried her free, yelling. Her eyes opened wide, then rolled back. She whispered the coordinates of a bunker none of us had mapped, the syllables perfectly repeated by every Vox in the hab. I ordered an investigation of the coordinates. No one questioned it. They were too terrified to act autonomously. The storm outside pulsed again. The chant had changed. It was no longer fragmented. Now it was coherent. Preserve the suns. Preserve the suns. Preserve the suns. The words did not come from the storm alone. I could hear them emanating from the walls, the floor, the very instruments I trusted. Even the consoles, which had never been touched by human hands since arrival, vibrated in resonance. The command hall began to warp subtly. Angles sharpened. The ceiling sagged and curved, exposing a latticework of ice beneath. My boots slipped against the polished floor, yet no moisture existed. I realized with a cold certainty that the storm itself had entered the hab. Lieutenant Garris tried to restore order by reading the Codex Administratum. The words rang hollow. They were drowned beneath the storm's rhythm, their syllables inverted and layered upon themselves. Men around him convulsed as if attempting to speak in unison with the weather. I drew my bolt pistol, aiming at the nearest wall. It exploded into a burst of flame, leaving scorch marks on the ice, but the wall did not burn. The scorch marks remained suspended, flickering slightly, as though the surface rejected destruction. It was then that I noticed the first physical manifestation. One of the missing troopers, Private Harron, appeared in the corner. He carried no weapon. His uniform was intact, but his skin had turned the hue of polished steel. His eyes glowed faintly blue. He spoke in a voice that was not his own. "The storm has chosen," he intoned. "The storm has chosen to remember." The men recoiled, some whispering fragments of the litany they had heard only in the blizzard outside. One dropped to his knees, muttering, "I am preserved, I am preserved." I ordered them to stand. I drew another breath. I reminded myself, I am a commissar, I enforce discipline, I am order. But even as I spoke, the air shifted. The hab wall opposite me stretched slightly, a shadow forming in the corner, and in that shadow, a figure, a patrol that had vanished days before, stood, unyielding, staring at me with eyes like frozen lanterns. Its lips parted. The words it spoke were mine. "Veras, come to the storm." We departed the hab bunker at dawn, or what the storm allowed to be called dawn. The sun, or perhaps the ghost of it, remained a pale smear behind a wall of ice, unmoving. Visibility, effectively zero. The snow here was different from the winds that assaulted the Hab. It sank unevenly underfoot, yet left no footprints behind, or perhaps it erased them. I could not tell. I led a squad of 20 disciplined men whose loyalty was already fraying. Every step we took, I felt the rhythm beneath our boots, an impossible cadence. It echoed the chants from the storm. Preserve the suns. Preserve the suns. Preserve the suns. We moved toward the northern relay tower, one of the coordinates whispered by Private Hestia before she froze into metal. I sent a runner to check the west flank, but he never returned. Another voice, echoing his last words, called back over the vox. The path is known. The path is remembered. The storm intensified. Snow swirled in spirals that defied aerodynamics, twisting around unseen poles. Shapes began to form, brief, fleeting silhouettes of soldiers from across Imperial history. A Vostroyan battalion, Acadian squad, even Astartes brothers I knew only from history, all marching past us in impossible formation, frozen mid-stride, faces blank, eyes hollow. I demanded silence, yet the men murmured fragments of the litany themselves, some unaware they spoke aloud. One corporal, pale as wax, tried to shake his head free, muttering, "It's teaching us. It's teaching us." We found the first outpost, the skeletal remains of a watchtower, half buried in snow. It had been abandoned, yet everything inside was intact. Ration packs, water reserves, data slates humming softly. The door was ajar, though no one had touched it. Inside, frost patterns ran across the walls in geometric sequences, triangles nested inside circles, spirals curling into themselves, symbols that seemed familiar yet unplaceable. In the center of the room lay a body, sister of battle, frozen mid-prayer. Her eyes were removed, yet the mouth moved, lips forming silent words in perfect cadence with the storm outside. I counted the pattern etched in frost on the floor. 13. The number repeated in dozens of places, each recurrence growing larger and more imposing. It is not coincidence. I did not need to speak it aloud to know it. This storm knows. It remembers. We pressed on, deeper into the blizzard. The cold was no longer a hazard. It was sentience. Fingers of frost crept into gloves, biting, metal and flesh alike. Breath crystallized instantly, forming jagged patterns in the air, like a latticework of shards. Shadows moved against the snow, independent of our own, following us. Every so often, a figure would vanish before our eyes, then reappear in the same position 2 steps later. Private Heron, the one who had first turned to me with my own voice, walked ahead without command. I called him back. He answered, but not with his own words. Step forward. We are preserved. His steps were synchronized with some unseen drum in the storm, echoing through my skull. I realized with a growing horror that the storm was not merely around us, it was inside us, inside our minds, inside our memories, inside the very marrow of our bones. We reached the outskirts of the shrine, an ancient, derelict structure partially buried in ice. Its architecture was recognizably imperial, yet grotesquely warped. Spires bent at angles no human hand could have achieved. Carvings adorned the walls, figures with no faces, limbs impossibly long, mouths stitched closed in eternal scream. The snow clung to the spires as though the storm itself had frozen in reverence. The squad paused at the threshold. I counted heads. 19 remained. 1 was missing. A corporal, trembling, whispered that he had seen the missing man outside, staring at them, but he had not entered with us. I could not argue. Time and space here no longer obeyed logic. Inside, the temperature did not rise. The storm penetrated every crevice, howling through corridors with voice-like clarity. I could hear soldiers' names called aloud, sometimes their own, sometimes the names of men long dead. Their bodies shivered despite armor, not from cold, but recognition. It was as if the shrine itself remembered them, called them, demanded they kneel in silence. A small chamber opened to the main hall. Here I found the first corpse arranged deliberately. Akkadian soldier, frozen in mid-step, lasergun raised. Around him frost spiraled in concentric circles, and the number 13 appeared etched into the floor once more. I noted this in my log. A pattern, recurring across the planet, the storm, and now within the shrine. The men whispered, fear creeping into every movement. One of them, Private Lothar, shivered uncontrollably and fell to his knees. "It's teaching us to march," he said, barely audible. I drew my bolt pistol, scanning the shadowed corridors. There were noises behind every corner, whispers, boots, doors creaking, but no figures visible. The storm's cadence seemed to accelerate in response to our movement, faster, sharper, pressing upon our senses with unbearable rhythm. As we descended deeper into the shrine, the walls themselves seemed to stretch, angles twisted, hallways elongated impossibly. I stumbled once, catching myself on a pillar that was not there moments before. Around me, the men began to recite fragments of the storm's chant in unison. Their eyes glazed, their limbs moving with a precision that did not belong to living men. At the far end of the hall, we saw it, a secondary door, half buried in ice, carvings glowing faintly in the dim light. Beyond it, the snow swirled unnaturally. Figures moved, just visible through the blizzard. Patrols that had vanished days ago, stepping forward in perfect formation. I called out to them, but received no response, not even a whisper. Only the cadence of the storm, now undeniably following our steps, guiding us. Cliffhanger. End of Chapter 3. We prepared to open the door. I counted my squad, 18 men. The 19th, Private Harron, was gone. In his place, a figure identical to me stood among the frozen patrols beyond the swirling snow, lips moving silently in my voice, and the storm whispered, "Come forward. Join the march." Log entry 004. Commissar Adjunct Verez, Druin's Rest, Day 9. Regiment status, critical. Environmental hazard, expanding. We crossed the threshold of the ice-cloaked door into the shrine's inner sanctum. Immediately, I felt the air change, not colder, not warmer, but heavier, as if gravity itself weighed down upon memory. The walls glistened, carved with glyphs that resembled liturgical inscriptions, but twisted. The Emperor's visage appeared in fragments, a faceless mask, a hand grasping nothing, a throne empty. I pressed my palm to the wall. The frost felt alive. The cold seeped not through my gloves but through my bones. The number 13, repeated everywhere, etched itself in frost along the floor, walls, even ceilings. It was no mere decoration. It pulsed like a heartbeat. Every step I took made it thrum louder, a vibration in the marrow. I called my squad to halt. Their breath crystallized mid-exhale, forming jagged filigree patterns in the dim light. One of them, Corporal Lothar, shook uncontrollably, murmuring, "It's waiting. It's remembering us." At the center of the room lay a shrine. Not a religious shrine as one would recognize, but a frozen tableau. Sisters of battle, frozen mid-prayer, eyes removed, mouths moving silently in unison with the storm outside. Their armor bore sigils of the ecclesiarchy, yet beneath the frost, their flesh was pale, almost metallic. The recurring pattern hit me suddenly. 13. 13 figures arranged in a semicircle, frozen in time, facing a pedestal. On that pedestal rested an empty reliquary, its lid shattered. It had been forcibly opened. Nothing remained inside, yet the air around it hummed with a presence, a memory of something immense and forbidden. I approached cautiously. The frost underfoot pulsed in rhythm with the storm. I could hear fragments of past battles, the clash of bolters, the screams of men and machine alike. The storm was no longer outside. It was here, inside, in every echo of bone and snow. Private Haran, who had vanished before, appeared at my side, though I had seen him only moments ago in the storm outside. He spoke, but not in his own voice. "They await. You must kneel." I drew my bolt pistol and raised it, but the weapon felt wrong in my hands. The metal hummed faintly, vibrating as though it too remembered events I had never lived. The squad froze. They were not staring at me. They were staring past me into the pedestal's empty reliquary, as if expecting someone, or something, to emerge. The chanting outside grew louder. I could feel the rhythm syncing with our own heartbeats. The storm had become a conductor, and we the orchestra, performing a symphony written long before our birth. We discovered another anomaly. Markings on the walls depicting an armoured figure with no face, a figure that seemed to change with every glance. Sometimes the figure held a sword. Sometimes it held a book. Sometimes it held nothing. Yet the shadow it cast remained complete, immovable. One of the soldiers pointed and whispered, "Is this the Primarch?" The thought made me shiver, but not from cold. The shrine did not belong to the Imperium, or rather it did, and it did not simultaneously. Reality itself had become uncertain, and I realized that the pattern 13 repeated not randomly, but deliberately, marking a ritual whose purpose we could not yet comprehend. A faint noise reached my ears, metallic footsteps, uneven yet deliberate. I froze. The squad turned, their movements slowed, hesitant. From the shadows emerged one of the frozen sisters of battle. Her body was intact but hollow, her mouth moving silently in exact sync with the storm outside. The figure lifted a hand, pointing toward the deeper catacombs of the shrine. I knew instinctively. This was no invitation. It was a command. I forced my squad to advance, though each step felt heavier than the last. Frost now formed unnatural shapes on the floor, coiling around our boots like serpents, trying to restrain us. The chanting was deafening, yet in the silence between syllables I heard something else. Whispers in my own voice, repeating my thoughts before I thought them. The corridor ahead opened into a massive hall. Ice columns lined the walls, impossibly tall, twisting as if alive. At the far end, 13 figures stood in formation, frozen soldiers of unknown origin, all gazing at the empty pedestal in the center. The number 13 pulsed, brighter now, echoing through the hall, a heartbeat we could not escape. I stepped forward. The cold seemed to resist my motion, coiling around my legs, grasping, urging me to halt. My squad followed hesitantly, some muttering prayers, others reciting the storm's litany unconsciously. And then I saw it, an Astartes. Not just any Astartes. He was preserved perfectly, frozen mid-stride, but moving impossibly, a shadow of animation despite being encased in ice. His eyes opened briefly, and I saw recognition. He whispered my name. Varys. Cliffhanger, end of chapter 4. The Astartes raised a hand toward me. The storm outside roared as if in answer. I realized with a chill that the 13th figures, the shrine, and the storm itself were all connected, watching, waiting, and aware. And at that moment, the snow began sliding toward us from the walls, not falling, not blowing, but moving with intent, forming shapes we could not comprehend. The shrine was alive. Log entry 005. Commissar Adjunct Varys, Druin's Rest, Day 10. Regiment status, critical, threat, imminent. The hall beyond the shrine stretched impossibly. Ice columns rose into darkness, each one twisting, branching like frozen arteries. The storm outside had infiltrated every corner. It whispered, breathed, and pulsed in tandem with our heartbeats. The cadence, preserve the suns, had become unbearable, a constant drum against my skull. The 13th figures stood motionless, their frozen forms framed against the far wall. And yet, despite their stillness, I knew they were watching, aware of our every movement. Private Heron, no longer himself, a mirror of my voice and will, led the squad forward. His eyes glimmered faintly blue. The squad obeyed without hesitation, each step in rhythm with the storm. I knew resistance was pointless. Reality here had rules we could not hope to understand, and these rules bent in the shrine's favor. The first signs of corruption revealed themselves when we reached the side chambers. Frost-covered corpses, both Imperial and alien in origin, lay arranged in formations reminiscent of battle diagrams. Limbs contorted unnaturally, eyes wide in silent terror, mouths frozen in the last word they spoke. And over every set of bodies, the number 13 appeared, etched in frost, as though marking them for preservation. I tried to take a sample, a scalpel to the shoulder of one corpse, but my hand passed through it as if it were air. The frost melted on contact, or refused to melt, suspending mid-air in crystalline patterns. The squad murmured uneasily. The storm outside echoed their anxiety. Every exhale crystallized instantly, forming jagged shapes in the air. I realized then, this was no natural cold. This was deliberate. It was deliberate, and it was aware. We entered a massive hall, the central chamber of the shrine. 13 figures now moved slowly toward us. The Frozen Legion. Each figure was an amalgam, part Astartes, part human, part machinery. Their armor shimmered beneath the ice, etched with sigils both Imperial and alien. Eyes glowed faintly blue, mouths opened and closed without sound. The 13th pulsed on the floor beneath them, a rhythmic heartbeat we could feel through bone. Private Lothar whispered, trembling, They know us." "Yes," I replied, "and they remember everything we are." The Frozen Legion began their march. Their steps were perfectly in rhythm with the storm outside. The very air vibrated, bending around them. Our squad fell into formation instinctively, mirroring their cadence. I knew then that to disobey was not merely futile. It was death, or worse. I called for the Vox to contact command. Static. The storm overrode every frequency. The walls of the chamber pulsed with frost as if breathing, emitting a faint harmonic resonance that carried through our bones. Every command I tried to give bounced back as distorted echoes. Even my own voice had been co-opted, repeating in staccato fragments over Vox and in the minds of my men. Private Heron stopped mid-step and turned, addressing me with a voice that was mine. "Join them. Preserve the suns." The words were not a suggestion. They were a decree. I felt the ice creeping over the floor, curling toward us in serpentine arcs. My squad hesitated. Some began repeating the chant aloud, eyes glassy. One fell to his knees, whispering, "I am preserved. I am preserved." At the center of the hall was the pedestal we had seen before. Now, atop it, rested a relic, the missing reliquary, reassembled, its contents invisible yet palpable. The Frozen Legion approached it slowly. As they did, the 13th pulsed faster, brighter. The storm's cadence accelerated in tandem. I realized the truth. The shrine, the storm, the Legion, they were all part of a singular ritual. A preservation ritual designed not to protect the Imperium, not to honor the Emperor, but to remember those lost and those yet to arrive. I ordered my squad to prepare weapons. It was futile. When the first bolter round fired, the shell passed through the nearest frozen figure, striking nothing. The ice beneath it shimmered as though aware, absorbing the energy, pulsing with a heartbeat synchronized to ours. The storm roared in triumph. The first physical contact occurred when a figure reached the squad's flank. Its hand, encased in frost and metal, brushed against the shoulder of Private Lothar. The corporal screamed, but no sound left his throat. His mouth opened, yet only the storm's cadence emerged. I tried to pull him back, but the frost spread over his armor in seconds, spreading along veins and sinew, freezing him into motionless obedience. I fired again. Nothing. The figure advanced. One by one, the squad began to fall under the same fate, preserved yet unbroken, obedience forced by some cold will, older than any Imperium doctrine. I realized the magnitude. The shrine did not just preserve bodies. It preserved minds, memories, and identities, converting them into vessels for some unseen intelligence. The storm outside, the legion before us, the shrine itself, they were all instruments of preservation, recording the Imperium's suns, shaping them, remaking them in ice and cadence. I knew then that this was only the beginning. 13 was not merely a number, it was a directive, and the frozen legion would continue to march, collecting all who entered the storm. Cliffhanger. End of chapter 5. I raised my bolt pistol one last time, trembling. The air vibrated. The frozen legion stopped, turning toward me. Private Harron's eyes glowed unnaturally. He whispered in my own voice, "Preserve yourself, or be preserved." And the 13th pulsed brighter than ever, as if counting down the seconds until my choice would be made. The storm had become a living pulse, its breath synchronizing with every thought, every heartbeat. It moved through the shrine, curling around columns, wrapping through the hallways, slithering under our boots. Our formation was meaningless. The frozen legion was not merely around us, it was inside us, shaping our perception, bending the very geometry of the shrine. I led what remained of my squad toward the inner sanctum, the core of the shrine, where the storm's will was most concentrated. The corridor stretched impossibly, walls twisted at angles that should have collapsed under their own weight. Frost etched into every surface shifted like liquid ice, forming faces, symbols, and fragments of the liturgy. 13 appeared everywhere, a heartbeat I could not escape. Private Harron walked at the front, unmoving, yet moving, a conduit of the storm. His voice, mine and yet not mine, whispered constantly, "Preserve yourself, preserve the suns, join us." We entered a chamber unlike any before. The floor was pure ice, but beneath it swirled currents of shadow and faintly glowing runes. Columns twisted upward into nothing, their tops vanishing into a grey void. At the centre floated the reliquary, suspended without support, its surface humming faintly. It pulsed in rhythm with 13, and I could feel my thoughts sinking with it, my perceptions stretching and bending with each pulse. The storm howled in response, echoing through the chamber in multiple layers, overlapping voices speaking in Binharic, High Gothic, and something older, alien, impossible to comprehend. The cadence was a command, not a suggestion. My men shivered, their lips moving, repeating words they did not understand. One of the remaining squad, Corporal Lothar, tried to kneel in obedience. I barked an order to halt him, but his body ignored me. It bent forward, hands folded, murmuring, "Preserve the suns, preserve the suns." The frozen legion stepped forward. The air trembled around them. Ice and metal merged into forms that defied anatomy. Limbs extended and contracted like machinery, faces shifting as if observing all angles at once. Their approach was not hurried, yet the chamber felt suffocating. Every pulse of 13 reverberated in my skull, in the bones of my legs, in my very marrow. The reliquary pulsed brighter. The storm's cadence quickened. I felt my own thoughts slipping, replaced by memories that were not mine. Campaigns I had never fought, cities I had never seen, battles where my hands killed men who had lived centuries before. The storm was feeding on us, cataloguing, absorbing, remaking. Private Harron turned. His eyes glowed unnaturally, and yet he appeared entirely human, my own reflection in all but name. He spoke. "We are chosen. You are chosen. The storm is preservation. Preservation is life. I realized the truth in a cold strike of terror. The storm was no anomaly. It was a mechanism, a ritual of cosmic scale, and we were the subjects. I ordered the men to advance cautiously toward the reliquary, to investigate, to understand. Frost curled around our boots, resisting, trying to push us back. Every step was met with a pulse from the 13th, and with each pulse, one of my men froze, their body crystallizing mid-motion. The storm claimed them quietly, inexorably. The inner chamber seemed infinite. Each angle we rounded revealed another hall, another corridor, another frozen tableau of 13 soldiers. Everyone whispered our names, everyone repeated the chant. I recognized some of the figures. Troopers lost days ago, patrols that vanished, even faces of men I commanded elsewhere in the regiment. The storm had already claimed them, preserving them in this impossible ritual, and now it sought me. The reliquary pulsed once more. I saw within it, briefly, a vision of countless frozen forms. Astartes, Vostroyans, humans, alien corpses, all preserved, their memories and identities catalogued, their will bent to the storm's purpose. 13 was not a number, it was a cycle, a design, a method of endless preservation through assimilation. I drew my bolt pistol. I fired. The round passed through the nearest figure, as if through mist. The reliquary's pulse intensified. The chamber trembled. My squad cried out, but their words were layered over each other, creating a distorted chorus. One by one, the remaining soldiers began repeating my name aloud, their voices merging with the storm's cadence. Private Harren stepped forward. The glow in his eyes flared. The storm whispered in my mind, "Join the march. Become preservation." Become the 13th, I realized with a cold certainty that resistance was no longer possible. The storm would consume us, preserve us, rewrite us. Cliffhanger. End of chapter 6. I stepped closer to the reliquary. The frozen legion halted, all 13 facing me, pulsing in rhythm with 13. My reflection stared back from Harren's glowing eyes. The storm reached into my skull, pulling at the edges of my mind. And the whisper in my own voice promised, "Step forward, or be preserved." Log entry 007. Commissar Adjunct Veris, Druin's Rest, Day 12. Regiment status, catastrophic. Anomaly, expanding beyond comprehension. I stepped closer to the reliquary, the frozen legion before me, all 13 figures pulsing in rhythm with 13. The air quivered, vibrating, with the storm's cadence. My breath crystallized instantly, forming shards that reflected the faint glow of the reliquary. Every shard bore a distorted reflection. My face, my squad, faces I had never known, all watching. The storm whispered in my mind, words layered over memory, over identity. Preserve yourself. Preserve the suns. Step forward. I realized then that the storm was not simply external. It had embedded itself in our very perception. I could not tell where it ended, and I began. My thoughts echoed back to me in fragments, altered, alien. Every memory I held seemed borrowed, twisted into something else. Private Harren stood unmoving, his eyes reflecting mine with eerie precision. The squad remained frozen behind him. I tried to issue orders. My voice emerged distorted, layered atop itself, repeating the storm's cadence. Lothar whispered, trembling. It remembers. Everything we lost. Everything we were. I glanced at the reliquary. It pulsed brighter, and within it, shadows shifted. Visions of men and women frozen mid-step, reliving final moments over and over. Soldiers lost to battles long past. Patrols swallowed by snow. Even those who had vanished entirely from records. They were preserved here, not merely as bodies, but as echoes. Minds catalogued, memories archived, identities fractured and fused. The storm's voice layered over theirs, creating a distorted symphony. The chamber felt impossibly vast. The walls expanded, contracted, revealing corridors and rooms that could not possibly exist. Frost patterns moved independently, curling like serpents, forming faces and sigils, whispering the names of my dead and living alike. I understood then that stepping forward was more than approaching the reliquary. It was immersion, submission. Each pulse of 13 resonated with the storm, syncing with my heartbeat. The frozen legion mirrored my steps, not moving, but existing, simultaneously present and absent. I called out for the squad to retreat. My words bounced back distorted. Harren's lips moved in perfect unison with mine, speaking my commands, but the squad obeyed the cadence of the storm, not my voice. Lothar fell to his knees, muttering fragments of the storm's litany in a trance. One by one, the remaining men began reciting the words, unconsciously, synchronizing with the pulsing 13th. I realized that every attempt to resist accelerated the storm's influence. The shrine itself seemed aware, bending geometry, freezing air, warping corridors, extending shadows to contain our movements. A vision struck me suddenly, one I could not comprehend as wholly mine. I saw the frozen legion marching across countless battlefields, past and future, preserving everything in their path. Entire regiments erased, yet preserved in ice and cadence. I saw my squad, preserved as part of this eternal march, each man becoming an echo of himself, another layer in the storm's ritual. I staggered back, clutching my head. The storm whispered again. Preserve. Join. Step forward. Every step toward the reliquary pulled fragments of my memories, my identity, my very soul. I realized that to approach it was to surrender everything, to be catalogued, remembered, and reformed. The frozen legion shifted subtly, almost imperceptibly. Harren's hand extended, beckoning me. His voice, my voice, echoed in my skull. Preserve yourself. Become the 13th. I tried to resist, taking a step back, but the floor responded. Frost rose like fingers, curling around my boots, tugging, forcing forward motion. The chamber pulsed in harmony with 13. I was walking despite my will, toward the reliquary, toward preservation. Suddenly the shadows within the chamber shifted violently. Echoes of the lost, men and women we had buried or forgotten, appeared along the walls, eyes open, mouths moving in silent command with the storm. They reached for us, pressing forward, collapsing the space between frozen and animate. My squad convulsed in place, some screaming silently, others already lost to the cadence. The storm's voice layered over mine. Step forward, or be preserved. Cliffhanger. End of Chapter 7. I reached out toward the reliquary. 13 pulsed violently, reverberating in my bones, resonating with every nerve. My reflection appeared in Harren's glowing eyes, multiplied in shards of ice across the chamber. And then the whispers crescendoed. Step forward, Commissar, or join the lost forever. The storm waited. Log entry 008. Commissar Adjunct Veres, Druin's Rest, Day 13. Regiment status, fragmented. Threat, ritual convergence imminent. The reliquary pulsed, 13 echoing in every bone, every nerve. My hand hovered above it, the ice creeping over my gloves, freezing my fingers in place. The storm had coiled around us completely, its voice layered over every thought. Preserve. Preserve. Step forward. Private Harren, my double, my reflection, stepped closer. Every motion mirrored mine perfectly. My own voice whispered in my mind, urging surrender, and yet instinct screamed resistance. The squad behind me was fragmented, some kneeling, frozen mid-step, chanting fragments of the storm's litany. Others convulsed, locked in a rhythm imposed by the shrine itself. I realized, painfully, that command no longer existed. I could issue orders, but they would not reach ears unclouded by the storm's influence. My authority was fracturing, my will splintering, my squad already halfway lost. I tried to rally them. Form up, hold your ground. The words emerged layered atop themselves, distorted. Some soldiers obeyed my cadence. Others followed the storms. Frost wrapped around boots, pulling, reshaping limbs, bending bodies toward the reliquary. 13 pulsed violently beneath our feet. The hall shifted. Columns twisted further, angles impossibly acute. Ceilings bending into nothingness. Frost moved independently, curling around my squad like grasping fingers. I glimpsed reflections in the ice. Fragments of men long dead. Regiments erased from records. Memories of soldiers we had buried in mass graves, all pressing toward us, demanding recognition, remembrance, preservation. Private Lothar collapsed, his mouth moving in perfect cadence with the storm. I grabbed him, but his body refused my will. His eyes glazed, the pulse of 13 synchronized with his heartbeat. He was already partially claimed. Harren raised his hand, beckoning me again. My mind screamed in protest. I forced myself to step back, and the floor responded violently. Frost surged upward, clawing at my boots, tugging, dragging me forward. The reliquary pulsed faster, resonating through the chamber, synchronizing my heartbeat, my thoughts, my very marrow. The echoes of the lost began to move more aggressively. Shadows along the walls shifted into humanoid forms, faces of soldiers frozen mid-step. Eyes hollow, mouths silent, yet their presence pressed upon the mind. One approached too close. I could feel memories not mine, campaigns, battles, deaths, filling my consciousness, threatening to overwrite who I was. I fired my bolt pistol. The rounds passed through them as if through mist. The frost around them shimmered, absorbing kinetic energy, pulsing with the storm's rhythm. I realized resistance was now more than futile. It was assimilation. The reliquary floated higher. A faint hum resonated from it, harmonizing with 13 and the storm. Frost patterns across the hall began to converge, forming a spiral centered on the relic. I understood. This was the culmination of the preservation ritual. All frozen figures, echoes, and even the storm itself were converging here, recording everything, preparing to consume what remained of us. I tried to rally my squad one final time. Fall back! Retreat! Their bodies twitched unnaturally, some obeying, some advancing toward the reliquary, compelled by forces beyond comprehension. 13 pulsed violently beneath them. Each beat was a heartbeat, a drum, a warning. Resistance is futile. Private Harren stepped fully into the center, now indistinguishable from me in movement, voice, and form. His lips whispered in perfect synchrony. Join the march. Become the 13th. Preserve yourself. I realized with a growing horror that my identity was fracturing. My commands, my thoughts, my very memories were being catalogued, echoed, mirrored. The storm had reached the threshold of the reliquary, and it sought not only my body but my mind. The shrine was alive, aware, deliberate, and entirely unforgiving. The echoes of the lost pressed closer. I could see fragments of my squad moving in unnatural formations, their limbs frozen yet active, eyes hollow, mouths moving in unison with the storm's cadence. The shrine was reasserting control. 13 pulsed faster, brighter, its rhythm dictating our very actions. Cliffhanger. End of chapter 8. I raised my hand toward the reliquary, every nerve screaming. Harren mirrored me perfectly, shadows of the lost pressing closer, frost curling upward, tugging, forcing my motion. The storm roared inside the chamber and inside my mind, layering voices over voices. And then a voice, my own, whispered clearly, "Step forward, or be erased from memory forever." The shrine waited. Log entry 009. Commissar Adjunct Veres, Druin's Rest, Day 14. Regiment status, extinction imminent. Anomaly, ritual apex underway. The reliquary hovered, pulsing violently, 13 beneath our feet, synced with every heartbeat, every nerve, every flicker of thought. The shrine's geometry had fully surrendered to impossibility. Walls bent at impossible angles, columns spiraled endlessly, and the ceiling vanished into void. Frost spiraled upward like writhing tendrils, reshaping the floor into labyrinthine patterns that mirrored battle formations I had only seen in long-forgotten archives. Private Heron, my double, moved ahead with perfect synchronicity, every step resonating with the storm's cadence. The squad, or what remained of them, convulsed with unnatural obedience. Some were frozen mid-step, others moving mechanically toward the reliquary. Their lips repeated the storm's litany with perfect precision. 13 pulsed brighter, faster, and I felt my own consciousness being pulled into the rhythm. I forced myself forward, my boots sliding on frost that seemed alive. Every step brought me closer to the reliquary, and closer to the edge of identity itself. The echoes of the loss pressed inward, pressing memories, images, lives foreign and familiar alike, into my mind. One image struck sharply: a Vostroyan battalion, buried decades ago, frozen mid-battle, faces twisted in silent screams. The storm's voice overlaid their cries. "Preserve! Preserve! Join the march!" The frozen legion moved in a slow, deliberate march. Limbs twisted, faces shifted, armor reflecting impossible angles. Their eyes glowed faintly blue, reflecting the pulse of 13 and the energy radiating from the reliquary. I could feel their awareness, not just of me, but of every fragment of my identity. I glanced at the squad. Lothar's body was half frozen, convulsing as if resisting some internal compulsion. Haran whispered, in my own voice, "You cannot retreat. Preservation requires completion." I tried to retreat, but frost surged upward, wrapping around my legs, curling like serpentine fingers. The floor beneath us shifted, warping geometry, forming impossible angles, pushing us inexorably toward the center. Every heartbeat of 13 reverberated through my bones, echoing the storm's command. Resistance was becoming physically impossible. The chamber seemed to stretch into infinity, and I glimpsed shadows of the lost forming ranks, regiments from across time, civilizations erased, identities folded into the storm. They advanced silently, eyes hollow, mouths moving in cadence with the storm. I reached the reliquary. Its pulse now dominated the chamber. The echoes of 13 resonated in my skull. Frost spiraled upward, merging into a vortex that lifted portions of the floor and suspended them mid-air. The frozen legion mirrored my movement, advancing, yet seemingly without advancing, a paradox of presence and absence. A faint hum emanated from the reliquary, harmonizing with 13. Within its glow, I glimpsed visions. Soldiers preserved, memories extracted, identities catalogued and rewritten. Private Heron raised a hand toward it, beckoning me, and I felt the storm tugging at the edges of my mind, whispering my past, my duties, my fears, all in perfect, inexorable rhythm. The storm's cadence accelerated. The air vibrated with voices of the lost, overlapping with my own, layering thought upon thought until I could scarcely distinguish my commands from the ritual's will. The reliquary pulsed brighter still, a heartbeat echoing 13, pulling at my identity. I realized with crushing clarity, to step forward was to surrender every fragment of self. To resist was already impossible. The shrine had consumed our actions, warped our perceptions, and integrated us into its pattern. The echoes of the lost pressed closer, merging with the squad, pressing my mind into alignment with the storm's rhythm. Every instinct screamed retreat. Every fiber of my being warned of obliteration. Yet my legs moved forward, drawn by the force of the shrine itself. The pulse of 13 hammered in my bones. The reliquary's glow enveloped me, illuminating faces of the lost frozen mid-motion, eyes hollow, mouths whispering in layered cadence. Preserve, join the march, become the 13th. Cliffhanger. End of Chapter 9. I stood before the reliquary, the storm, the frozen legion, and the echoes of the lost pressed inward, pulling identity, memory, and will into the pulse of 13. Harren, my reflection, raised his hand. The shrine seemed to breathe, bending reality around us, and the whisper, unmistakably in my own voice, resonated through the chamber. Step forward, or be dissolved into the memory of the lost. Log entry 010. Commissar Adjunct Veras, Druin's Rest, Day 15. Regiment status, fragmented beyond recall. Anomaly, identity collapse, imminent. The reliquary pulsed violently at the center of the chamber. 13 beneath our boots hammered through my body, resonating in marrow and tendon. Frost swirled upward, curling into spirals that reached toward the ceiling, converging into shapes that resembled faces, limbs, and fragments of the past. Each pulse threatened to fracture my mind, pulling memories into the storm's cadence. Private Harren, my mirror, my echo, stood motionless, his glowing eyes perfectly synchronized with mine. The squad was a collection of frozen and convulsing bodies, some chanting the storm's litany, others locked in silent obedience. I could not distinguish their voices from my own. I tried to speak, but the words were layered over themselves. My commands split into multiple cadences, distorted. Lothar, halfway crystallized, mimicked me, uttering syllables that were both mine and not mine. Frost crawled along my legs, binding, tugging, a constant reminder that the shrine was no longer simply a location. It was a sentient instrument of control. The echoes of the lost pressed closer. I glimpsed the faces of troopers long buried, soldiers from campaigns erased, entire squads preserved mid-moment, staring through time and space with hollow eyes. The shrine had catalogued them all. I felt their memories, their deaths, their fears, layering over mine. 13 pulsed, and I could feel my identity splintering. I realized the truth. Every step toward the reliquary fractured who I was. Each pulse drew pieces of my consciousness into the storm's rhythm. Private Harren moved in perfect synchronicity, his hand extending toward the relic. His voice, my voice, whispered, "Step forward, complete the preservation, become the 13th." I resisted, staggering back. The frost surged upward, wrapping around my boots, coiling around my thighs, tugging me inexorably forward. I tried to force my squad to retreat, but bodies convulsed involuntarily, following the cadence of 13 rather than my commands. Some men began speaking in tongues, voices layering with the storm, overlaying memories, not their own. I raised my bolt pistol, firing at the nearest frozen figure. The round passed through them as if through mist. Frost rippled and shimmered, absorbing the kinetic energy. The pulse of 13 intensified, resonating with my own heartbeat. My memories, my experiences, my very sense of self were being catalogued, rewritten, and folded into the storm. I glimpsed shards of my identity scattered across the chamber, reflections in the ice, fragments of thought whispered by Harren, echoes in the voices of the lost. Each shard pulsed in rhythm with 13, a reminder that stepping forward was both inevitable and complete surrender. A vision struck me suddenly. The frozen legion marching across the Imperium, collecting the fallen, the lost, the forgotten. Entire regiments, preserved, their memories and wills folded into ice and cadence. The storm was infinite, a mechanism for preservation beyond comprehension, beyond time. I understood then that the shrine was not a trap. It was a machine, a ritual of cosmic preservation that demanded submission. The reliquary floated higher, glowing brighter, pulsing faster. Frost curled upward into a spiraling vortex. My mind fragmented further. Harren's hand extended again. My reflection, my echo, my own shadow beckoned. I could feel my thoughts pulled, memories catalogued, identity splintering under the pressure of 13. The squad convulsed in unison, chanting the litany. Frost spiraled from floor to ceiling, coiling around their bodies, then mine. Every heartbeat of 13 was another fracture, another catalogued memory, another step toward assimilation. My own voice repeated in layers. Preserve, join the march, become the 13th. I staggered forward. The shards of my identity rattled in the chamber, reflecting in Frost, in Harren, in the relic itself. 13 pulsed violently, resonating through the bones of my body, echoing in every fragment of thought. Resistance was becoming meaningless. Submission was inevitable. Cliffhanger. End of chapter 10. I reached out toward the reliquary. The storm roared inside the chamber and inside my mind. Frost and shadows pressed inward. The shards of my own identity spun around me, coalescing and fracturing simultaneously. And the whisper, unmistakably mine, yet alien, resonated clearly. Step forward, or cease to exist as yourself forever. The shrine waited, patient, inexorable, eternal. Log entry 11. Commissar Adjunct Veres, Druin's Rest, Day 16. Regiment status, nearly obliterated. Anomaly, identity merger progressing. The reliquary pulsed with unbearable intensity. 13 beneath my boots vibrated through marrow, sinew, and bone, reshaping perception with each rhythm. Frost coiled upward in writhing spirals, forming faces, limbs, and fragments of memory that flickered across the chamber. Every pulse pulled more shards of my consciousness into the storm's cadence. Private Harren stood before me, a perfect mirror, glowing eyes reflecting my own fear. The squad, fragmented and partially frozen, swayed between obedience and convulsion, some chanting the storm's litany, others frozen mid-step, trapped by the shrine's impossible geometry. 13 pulsed brighter, each beat hammering my identity further apart. I tried to rally what remained of my command. Hold formation. Fall back. My voice emerged layered, distorted, overlaid with Harren's whisper and the storm's cadence. Lothar, half frozen, mimicked me perfectly, chanting in tongues I did not know, speaking fragments of my own memories back at me. Frost surged along my legs, pulling, twisting, bending my boots toward the reliquary. I realized the shrine was not merely a place, it was a mechanism, a crucible, and I was at its center. Each pulse of 13 catalogued memory, recording identity, fracturing the self, merging it with the storm, the reliquary, and the frozen legion. I stepped forward, resisting with every ounce of will. Frost rose in serpentine arcs, curling around my body, pressing shards of memory into place, forcing alignment with the ritual. Shadows along the walls twisted into forms of lost soldiers, faces hollow, mouths moving in perfect rhythm with the cadence. They pressed closer, merging with my perception, whispering, "Preserve, join the march, become the 13th." I realized that every attempt at resistance only strengthened their pull. 13 pulsed violently beneath us. The relic floated higher, its glow bathing the chamber in blinding light, illuminating the fractures in my consciousness. Each heartbeat of the storm was another shard of identity catalogued, another fragment of self absorbed into the ritual. Harren stepped forward, hand outstretched. His glowing eyes reflected every fragment of my identity, the memory of my first command, of fallen comrades, of the campaigns I had led. "Step forward," he whispered, my voice yet alien. "Preserve yourself. Complete the ritual." I staggered, frost curling around my boots, pulling me inexorably. The echoes of the lost advanced, pressing memories, lives, and fears into my mind. I glimpsed visions of soldiers preserved across centuries, entire regiments catalogued in ice and cadence, their voices layered over mine, over Heron's, over the storm itself. The chamber stretched into impossible angles, columns twisting, ceiling vanishing into void. Frost spiraled, converging into a vortex centered on the reliquary. 13 pulsed faster, brighter. The storm's voice was inside my skull, dictating every step. Resistance was no longer possible. I reached the center. The shards of my identity swirled around me, reflecting in Frost, in Heron, in the relic. I could feel my consciousness being catalogued, sorted, merged with the storm's rhythm. 13 pulsed violently, resonating through bone, marrow, and nerve. I was fracturing, merging, being rewritten with every heartbeat. The echoes of the loss pressed inward, merging with the squad, merging with me. Frost curled around arms and legs, climbing, pulling, reshaping. My reflection in Heron's eyes fractured into multiple faces, multiple identities, all whispering the same command. Preserve, join, become the 13th. Cliffhanger, end of chapter 11. I stretched my hand toward the reliquary. 13 pulsed with unbearable rhythm. Frost, shadows and shards of identity coalesced around me. The storm's voice layered over my own. Step forward, or cease to exist as yourself forever. The chamber waited, infinite, patient, and merciless. Log entry 12. Commissar Adjunct Verez, Druin's Rest, Day 17. Regiment status, all but erased. Anomaly, complete assimilation underway. The reliquary's pulse was deafening, 13 resonating in my bones like a drum of cosmic inevitability. Frost coiled upward like sentient serpents, wrapping the chamber in spiraling locks of white and shadow. Every pulse pulled fragments of my identity into the storm, every heartbeat a cataloguing of memory, every breath a submission to the ritual's rhythm. Private Heron, indistinguishable from me, stepped forward with precise synchronicity. His glowing eyes mirrored mine. The squad was nearly gone, half frozen, half convulsing, chanting the storm's litany. Every man's voice layered over my own, over the echoes of the lost, over the cadence of 13. Resistance was futile. I lifted my bolt pistol, firing at a frozen figure. The rounds passed through him, mist consuming the impact. Frost shimmered, pulsating with the storm, merging each strike into the chamber's rhythm. I realized then that my actions no longer mattered. The shrine itself had taken command. Every step I took, every order I gave, was already anticipated, already subsumed into the ritual. The echoes of the lost pressed closer, faces of troopers long buried, regiments erased from history, civilians claimed by time and war, all pressed into my perception. Their hollow eyes, their frozen mouths, their impossible forms whispered fragments of memory into my mind. I could feel my identity fracturing, merging, being rewritten. 13 pulsed violently beneath our feet. Heron extended his hand toward the reliquary. Frost spiraled around him, around me, around the shattered remnants of my squad. The shards of my consciousness swirled through the chamber, colliding, merging, aligning with 13. Every pulse catalogued another fragment of self. Memories of campaigns, commands, failures, and victories were being consumed, preserved, reassembled in a pattern beyond comprehension. I tried to resist, but Frost coiled around my boots, tugging me forward, drawing me inexorably toward the relic. Shadows along the walls twisted into humanoid forms, faces hollow and ancient, mouths moving in perfect synchronization with the storm's litany. 13 pulsed faster, brighter, every beat a hammer striking against marrow, sinew, and thought. I staggered, identity splintering with every heartbeat. The frozen legion advanced subtly, a paradox of motion, reflecting the pulse of 13. Frost and shadow merged into a vortex around the reliquary, centering the ritual, amplifying its force. I glimpsed visions of soldiers preserved across centuries, entire regiments, entire planets catalogued, their memories stored within the storm. Private Heron, my mirror, my echo, whispered in my mind. Preserve. Join. Become the 13th. The shards of my identity swirled violently, spinning between frost, shadow, and relic. My memories were catalogued, rewritten, fused with the storm. 13 pulsed violently beneath me, echoing in every nerve, threatening to erase every trace of individuality. I reached toward the reliquary. Frost and shadows coiled tighter. My identity shattered further. Memories collided and merged, thoughts layered upon thoughts, voice upon voice. The storm had claimed everything, reducing my consciousness to fragments in rhythm with the pulse of 13th. Resistance was gone. Submission was inevitable. The chamber expanded impossibly. Frost spiraled from floor to ceiling. Shadows of the lost pressed inward. The reliquary floated higher, pulsing with unbearable brilliance. The echoes of the lost, the squad, Heron and I were merging into a single cadence, a single rhythm, a single entity catalogued by the storm. Cliffhanger. End of chapter 12. I extended my hand fully toward the reliquary. 13 pulsed in perfect rhythm with my fractures. Frost, shadows, and identity collided around me. The storm whispered with my voice, yet alien. Step forward, or be erased into the rhythm of the lost forever. The shrine waited. Infinite, merciless, and inevitable. Log entry 13. Commissar Adjunct Varys, Druin's Rest, Day 18. Regiment status, fully assimilated. Anomaly, ritual apex achieved. The reliquary hovered, a blinding pulse at the chamber's center. 13 beneath our feet throbbed like a war drum, each beat fracturing and cataloguing identity with mechanical precision. Frost spiraled violently upward, merging into a vortex of white and shadow. My own thoughts, my memories, myself, felt as though they were being recorded, preserved, and rewritten simultaneously. Private Heron, indistinguishable from me, stepped forward, every motion synchronized perfectly with 13. The squad was nearly gone, half frozen, half convulsing, every man caught between obedience to the storm and instinctual rebellion. Frost coiled around limbs, tugging, shaping, forcing every body toward the reliquary. The echoes of the lost pressed closer, filling the chamber with impossible voices, each whispering memories, not their own. I tried to speak, to rally the remains of my command, but my voice layered over itself, merging with Heron's, merging with the storm. Lothar, partially crystallized, recited fragments of my own thoughts back to me, twisted into liturgical cadence. The chamber warped around us. Columns spiraled into infinite angles, walls stretched, ceilings vanished into void, all converging on the reliquary. 13 pulsed faster, brighter, hammering through bone, sinew, and marrow. The storm whispered constantly, "Preserve, step forward, become the 13th." I realized with a sick clarity, resistance was meaningless. Each attempt at control only accelerated assimilation. My memories were fragments now, catalogued and rewritten by the ritual. The squad was no longer mine. They were instruments of the storm, echoes marching to the pulse of 13. I staggered forward. Frost wrapped around my legs, tugging, bending, forcing alignment with the relic. Shadows along the walls coalesced into the frozen faces of lost soldiers, each pressing memories, fears, identities into mine. Every heartbeat of 13 was another shard of self absorbed into the storm. The chamber seemed infinite, expanding, compressing, warping reality itself to contain the ritual. Private Heron extended his hand, mirrored mine. His eyes reflected every fragment of my identity, every memory of campaigns, victories, failures, fallen comrades. Step forward. Preserve yourself, he whispered, my voice yet alien. 13 pulsed violently beneath our feet. The shards of my consciousness swirled around me, coalescing, fracturing, aligning with the storm. I reached for the reliquary. Frost and shadow spiraled violently, merging with shards of memory, twisting perception. The echoes of the lost pressed inward, merging with my squad, with Heron, with me. Every pulse of 13 hammered in my bones, layering memory upon memory, voice upon voice, thought upon thought. I could feel identity splintering, merging, becoming part of the march, part of the rhythm of preservation. Visions assaulted me. The frozen legion marching across worlds, collecting the lost, preserving them in ice and cadence. Entire regiments catalogued, entire histories absorbed. I understood. The march was infinite, unstoppable, and now I was part of it. 13 pulsed, resonating in my skull, merging my consciousness with the storm. Resistance was gone. Submission was absolute. Cliffhanger. End of chapter 13. I extended my hand fully toward the reliquary. The storm roared inside the chamber and inside my mind. Frost, shadows, and fragments of identity collided violently, coalescing into a single rhythm, and the whisper, mine yet alien, resounded, step forward, or remain lost forever outside the march. The shrine waited, infinite, patient, and merciless. Log entry 14. Commissar Adjunct Veris, Druin's Rest, Day 19. Regiment status, fully assimilated. Anomaly, ritual, irreversible. The reliquary pulsed like a heart of ice and void. 13 beneath my boots reverberated through every sinew, bone, and memory. Frost spiraled upward, merging into a vortex that seemed to consume the very chamber, curling into impossible shapes that reflected faces. My face, Harren's face, the countless lost. Every pulse catalogued fragments of identity, aligning them with the storm's cadence, a rhythm I could no longer resist. Private Harren mirrored me completely, his hand extended. His eyes reflected every shard of memory in my mind. Victories, defeats, comrades long dead, mistakes etched into history. The squad had become instruments of the storm, convulsing, frozen, chanting fragments of liturgy that no longer belonged to them or me. Frost coiled around limbs like sentient sinew, tugging, shaping, bending every body toward the reliquary. I tried to step back, but the chamber itself resisted. Frost surged upward, wrapping around boots and thighs, forcing alignment. Shadows along the walls coalesced into humanoid shapes, lost soldiers, long erased from history, pressing memories, fears and identities into mine. Every heartbeat of 13 shattered what little remained of my self, cataloguing it in rhythm with the storm. The reliquary floated higher, glowing brighter, pulsing faster. 13 pulsed violently beneath us, hammering through bones and marrow. The storm whispered relentlessly, preserve, join, become the 13th. I realized with sick clarity that resistance was now meaningless. Every shard of thought, every memory, every fragment of my consciousness was being absorbed, rewritten, merged with the storm and the march. I stretched my hand toward the reliquary, fragments of my identity swirling violently. Frost and shadow spiraled around me, coiling, twisting, merging. The echoes of the lost pressed inward, merging with my squad, with Harren, with me. My consciousness splintered, layered over itself, reborn in cadence with 13. Visions assaulted me. The frozen legion marching across time and space, collecting the dead, the erased, the forgotten. Entire regiments, entire worlds catalogued, identities preserved in ice and rhythm. The march was infinite. I was part of it. 13 pulsed in my skull, each beat a hammer of assimilation. Submission was total. Resistance was gone. I glanced at Harren. He was indistinguishable from me now, a mirror reflecting fragments of self I could barely recognize. Frost curled around us, pulling, aligning, merging. The chamber warped further into impossible geometry. Shadows pressed closer, merging with ice and memory, folding time, space, and consciousness into a single cadence. 13 pulsed, resonating through the marrow of every soldier. I understood the ritual's purpose: preservation beyond mortality, beyond identity. The shrine was not malevolent, it was methodical, an instrument for cataloguing the lost and forgotten, merging them into eternity. I was already merging. Every heartbeat, every pulse of 13, every whisper of the storm was another step toward final assimilation. Cliffhanger. End of chapter 14. I extended my hand fully toward the reliquary. Frost, shadows, and shards of identity collided violently, merging into a single rhythm. And the whisper, mine yet alien, resounded in my skull. Step forward, or remain lost outside eternity. The shrine waited, infinite, absolute, merciless. Log entry 15. Commissar Adjunct Veres, Druin's Rest, Day 20. Regiment status: erased. Anomaly: completion achieved. The reliquary pulsed brighter than any star I had ever glimpsed, a blinding rhythm dominating the chamber. 13 beneath my boots hammered through bone, marrow, and thought, aligning every fragment of existence to its cadence. Frost spiraled upward, merging into a colossal vortex of white and shadow, folding the chamber into impossible geometry. Every heartbeat of the storm shattered the remnants of myself, weaving identity into the eternal rhythm. Private Haran, my mirror, my echo, stood at my side, indistinguishable from me, eyes reflecting every fragment of memory I once held. The squad was gone, absorbed into the ritual, their voices now part of the cadence. Frost coiled around arms and legs, tugging, shaping, and merging all that remained of flesh and memory into the reliquary's will. The echoes of the lost pressed inward, melding into a single consciousness with the storm. I tried to resist, but my body moved independently of my will. Frost wrapped around my boots, pulling me inexorably forward. The chamber seemed infinite, stretching into every angle, every plane, yet folding upon itself to contain the ritual. Shadows along the walls took shape: lost soldiers, vanished regiments, civilizations erased from history, all pressing into me, whispering fragments of memory and liturgy in layered cadence. Every pulse of 13 hammered in my skull, threatening to overwrite every fragment of self. I realized with crushing clarity that resistance was impossible. Each shard of thought, each memory, each fragment of consciousness was being absorbed, catalogued, and merged into the eternal march. The shrine's purpose was not destruction, it was preservation beyond comprehension, an infinite registry of the lost. I stretched my hand toward the reliquary. Frost, shadow, and shards of identity collided violently around me. The echoes of the lost merged with Haran, with the squad, with me. My consciousness splintered, layered upon itself, reborn in perfect cadence with 13. The storm's whisper filled my mind. Preserve, join, become. The 13th. Visions assaulted me. The frozen legion marching across the Imperium, collecting the forgotten, the erased, the dead. Entire regiments, entire worlds catalogued, identities preserved in ice, shadow, and rhythm. The march was infinite, unstoppable, eternal. 13 pulsed violently, resonating in marrow and thought, merging all fragments into the same cadence. I understood the final truth. I was no longer Commissar Adjunct Veres. I was a fragment of the march, one of countless preserved in frost and cadence. Haran, the squad, the echoes of the lost, all merged into a single, eternal rhythm. The reliquary's pulse was now mine, and everyone else's simultaneously. The shrine had not destroyed us, it had catalogued us, merged us, preserved us for eternity. Time, identity, and perception were meaningless. Frost and shadow spiraled endlessly, extending beyond Druin's Rest, beyond the planet, perhaps beyond the Imperium. The march was infinite, and I, what was left of me, was a part of it. Final cliffhanger/last image. The storm's whisper, mine and alien, resounded clearly. Step forward, or be forgotten forever. I stepped, and the march continued, infinite, eternal, merciless, across the void, across worlds, across memory itself. The chamber of Druin's Rest fell silent. Frost lingered, shadows remained, and somewhere, in the pulse of 13, the preserved waited, patient, eternal, unbroken.